the heir of the Hollow Prince. Briarvex had always known the ruins beyond the cliffs were dangerous, but she never knew why. Until the night, she stepped inside, and the carvings on the walls shifted beneath her fingers, spelling out a name she did not recognize but felt. The torches flared. The air thickened. And then he appeared golden-eyed, unreadable, his presence making the air vibrate. "You woke me," he murmured, tilting his head. "And now you're mine." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Eventide. The salt spray stung Briarvex's cheeks, a familiar discomfort that grounded her even as the wind threatened to rip the worn wool shawl from her shoulders. At 57, she was no stranger to the harsh realities of the sea, having lived her entire life in the shadow of the cliffs that guarded the forgotten edge of Eventide. The village itself was a collection of weathered stone houses clinging precariously to the hillside, a testament to the resilience of its inhabitants and a reflection of Briar's own quiet strength. She paused at the crest of the path, her gaze drawn, as always, to the ruins that crown the highest point. Jagged silhouettes against the bruised twilight sky, they were a constant reminder of a past shrouded in mystery and whispered warnings. "Don't go near the ruins, Briar," her grandmother had cautioned countless times, her voice raspy with age and a fear Briar never understood. "There's darkness there, a sadness that clings to the stones." But tonight, the usual unease was laced with a strange pull, a hum of energy that resonated deep within her bones. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like anticipation. A feeling she hadn't experienced since her husband, Thomas, had been lost to the sea 15 years ago. The grief had been a constant companion, a dull ache that had settled into her heart, leaving her hollowed out, existing but not truly living. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something ancient and indefinable. It tugged at her, whispering promises of something. Something she couldn't name, but desperately needed. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fiery orange and deep violet, a breathtaking spectacle that mirrored the turmoil within her. Briar's hands, roughened by years of mending nets and tending her small garden, clenched into fists. She was no longer the young, carefree girl who had dreamed of adventures beyond Eventide. She was a woman weathered by loss, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face etched with the lines of time and sorrow. Yet, tonight, something stirred within her, a flicker of the woman she once was, yearning for something more. She took a step forward, then another, the path beneath her feet crumbling with each stride. The air grew colder, the wind sharper, as she neared the ruins. The stones, bathed in the fading light, seemed to pulse with a faint, inner luminescence. She reached out a hand, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings that adorned the ancient walls. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe beneath her touch. One particular carving caught her attention, a series of symbols that resonated with that strange, inner hum. She traced them slowly, her breath catching in her throat as the stones beneath her fingers grew warm. The symbols, they seemed to be changing, forming a word, a name. It wasn't a name she recognized, not consciously, yet it felt deeply familiar, echoing in the hollow spaces of her heart. Alaric. The name vibrated in the air, a silent whisper that seemed to awaken the very stones around her. Suddenly, the torches that lined the entrance to the ruins, long dormant, flared to life, casting a flickering, golden light that danced across the crumbling walls. The air thickened, heavy with an unseen presence. A shiver ran down Briar's spine, not of fear, but of recognition. Then he appeared. He stepped out of the shadows, as if materializing from the very stone itself. Tall and imposing, he was a figure of breathtaking power and undeniable beauty. His eyes, the color of molten gold, fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. His hair, the color of raven's wings, fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was both regal and hauntingly vulnerable. He wore clothes that seemed to belong to another era, dark, finely tailored garments that hinted at nobility and power. He didn't speak at first, simply observing her with that unsettling gaze, his presence filling the ruins, making the air vibrate with an almost palpable energy. Briar felt a strange pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. She should have been terrified, should have run, but she found herself rooted to the spot, captivated by his otherworldly presence. "You woke me," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to echo the ancient whispers of the stones. He tilted his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, yet it held a weight of command that made her heart pound. The gold in his eyes intensified, burning like twin flames in the gathering darkness. "And now," he continued, his voice taking on a possessive edge, "you are mine." His words, spoken with such quiet certainty, sent a shiver of both fear and a strange, undeniable excitement through her. Briar's mind reeled. Who was he? What did he mean? And why did a part of her, a long dormant part, feel a flicker of belonging? The wind howled, the sea crashed, and a feeling like falling gripped Briar's soul. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Ruins. The declaration hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, laced with an ancient power that made the very stones of the ruins seem to tremble. Briar, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her, found herself unable to look away from the golden-eyed man. He radiated an aura of both danger and allure. It was a perplexing combination, one that both terrified and intrigued her.
"Mine?"
She finally managed to ask, her voice a shaky whisper that was almost lost in the wind's mournful cry. I don't understand." He took a step closer, the flickering torchlight casting dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the strong line of his jaw. He moved with a grace that was both fluid and predatory, like a wild animal accustomed to command. The scent of pine and that other, indefinable, ancient aroma intensified, wrapping around her like a tangible presence. "You awaken me," he repeated, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate deep within her chest. "You called my name. You felt the pull of the stones, the echo of the agreement." Briar shook her head, bewildered. "Agreement? I don't know what you're talking about. I felt drawn here. To the ruins." A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his features, quickly replaced by a look of intense scrutiny.
"Drawn?"
Or summoned. He reached out, his long, elegant fingers brushing against her cheek. The touch, though fleeting, sent a jolt of energy through her, a sensation that was both shocking and strangely pleasant. It felt warm. Surprisingly, impossibly warm. Briar recoiled instinctively, her hand flying to her cheek where his fingers had grazed her skin. The warmth lingered, a tangible reminder of his touch. "I don't understand," she repeated, her voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a growing sense of defiance. "Who are you?" He lowered his hand, his golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "I am Alaric," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a weight of history and power. "And you, Briar Vex, are bound to me." The name Alaric. It was the name she had seen, the name the stones had formed. But how could she be bound to him? She had never met him before, had never even heard of him. Yet, the undeniable pull she felt towards him, the strange resonance of his name, suggested a connection that defied logic.
"Bound?"
she questioned, her mind struggling to make sense of his words. "I'm bound to no one. I'm a widow. I live a simple life," Alaric interrupted her, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The simplicity you cling to is a veil, Briar. A shield against a truth you have long forgotten, or perhaps a truth that was deliberately hidden from you." He gestured around them, at the crumbling walls, the flickering torches, the intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a hidden energy. "These ruins are not merely stones, Briar. They are a testament to a pact, an ancient agreement between your bloodline and mine. A bond forged centuries ago, sealed with magic and sacrifice." Briar stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Bloodline? Pact? Magic? These were the stuff of legends, of the old wives' tales she had dismissed as folklore. Yet, the intensity in Alaric's eyes, the palpable power that radiated from him, suggested a truth far stranger and more profound than anything she had ever imagined. "My bloodline?" she whispered, her thoughts racing. Her grandmother had always been secretive about their family history, deflecting her questions with vague answers and warnings about the past. Could there be a connection? A hidden truth that explained the strange pull she felt towards the ruins, towards Alaric? Alaric watched her, a flicker of something that might have been sympathy in his golden eyes. "You have much to learn, Briar," he said softly. "And I have much to remember." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the entrance of the ruins, as if listening to something beyond her hearing. "But not here.
Not now.
There are others who would seek to interfere. We must leave."
Leave?
Briar echoed, her heart pounding in her chest. "Leave Eventide? But my home," he turned back to her, his expression resolute. "Your home is where I am, Briar. Where you have always been destined to be." The wind picked up around the pair, tossing Briar's hair around her face, her shawl slipping to the cold stone. It almost felt as if Alaric were summoning the elements. Chapter 3. The Prince's Decree. The wind whipped around them, a tangible manifestation of the turmoil brewing within Briar. Leave Eventide? Abandon her home, her life, everything she had ever known? The thought was preposterous, terrifying. Yet, Alaric's words, his very presence, resonated with a power that made it difficult to simply dismiss him. "Destined?" she challenged, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt at defiance. "I make my own destiny, Alaric. I am not some pawn in a game I don't understand." His golden eyes softened, a flicker of what might have been respect crossing his features. "Perhaps you are not a pawn, Briar," he conceded, his voice a low rumble that seemed to calm the swirling wind, if only slightly. "But you are certainly entangled. In a web far older and more complex than you can imagine." He gestured towards the village below, barely visible in the deepening twilight. "Your life in Eventide, it was a sanctuary, a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep you hidden, safe. But the illusion is crumbling, Briar. The past is catching up." "Hidden from what?" Briar demanded, her frustration mounting. "Safe from whom?" Alaric hesitated, his gaze shifting towards the horizon, as if searching for something in the gathering darkness. "From those who fear the power we possess," he said finally, his voice low and guarded. "From those who would seek to exploit it or destroy it." He turned back to her, his expression grave. "There are forces at play, Briar, ancient rivalries, blood feuds that have spanned centuries. Your awakening, it has stirred them. They will come." The thought of unseen enemies, of a hidden world of danger and intrigue, sent a shiver of fear down Briar's spine. She had lived a quiet, solitary life, far removed from any such conflicts. Yet, the undeniable power that emanated from Alaric, the strange, unsettling events of the evening, suggested a reality far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. "And you can protect me?" she asked, the question in a mix of skepticism and a desperate hope. He met her gaze, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "I can," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "It is my duty, my obligation. But it is also more than that." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from hers, the warmth radiating from his skin a palpable presence. "There is a bond between us, Briar," he said softly. "A connection that transcends duty, obligation. A connection that calls to something deep within me." His words, the unspoken emotion behind them, sent a wave of warmth through her, a feeling that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. She found herself drawn to him, despite her fear, despite her reservations. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a hint of loneliness that mirrored her own, forging an unexpected connection between them. "But I don't even know you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind sigh. A sad smile touched his lips. "And yet you do," he countered softly, "in a way that defies logic, defies memory. You feel it, don't you? The pull?" Briar hesitated, then slowly nodded. She couldn't deny the strange, undeniable connection she felt to him, a feeling that resonated deep within her soul. It was a feeling that both terrified and exhilarated her, a feeling that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself, about the world. "We must go," Alaric said, his voice breaking the spell, his expression hardening once more. "We have lingered too long. They will be searching for us." He offered her his hand, his palm open, an invitation and a command all in one. Briar stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a choice, a leap of faith into the unknown, a decision that would change her life forever. She took a deep breath, the scent of salt and pine and that other, ancient aroma filling her lungs. She looked at Alaric, at the power and vulnerability in his golden eyes, at the unspoken promise of protection and something more. Then slowly, tentatively, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of energy surged through her, a powerful wave of warmth and belonging. The ruins seemed to hold their breath. It was the beginning, and Briar did not yet know if it was of her end, or something magnificent. Chapter 4. A bond forged in shadow. The contact was electric. Not painful, not frightening, but profound. It was as if a circuit had been completed, a missing piece clicking into place. Briar gasped, her breath catching in her throat as the energy surged through her, a warm, tingling sensation that spread from her fingertips to the very core of her being. Alaric's hand tightened around hers, his grip firm but not constricting, a silent reassurance that grounded her amidst the swirling chaos of emotions. He didn't speak, but his golden eyes, locked on hers, conveyed a depth of understanding, of shared experience, that transcended words. It was as if he could see into her soul, see the fear and confusion, but also the flicker of courage, of burgeoning trust. "We must hurry," he said, his voice a low murmur that barely reached her ears above the rising wind. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her towards the edge of the ruins, away from the flickering torches and the village below. Briar stumbled slightly, her legs feeling unsteady, her mind still reeling from the shock of the connection. She followed him willingly, her hand clasped tightly in his, feeling a strange sense of security in his presence, despite the unknown dangers that lay ahead. They moved quickly, silently, through the crumbling remains of the ancient structure, Alaric guiding her with an effortless grace that suggested he knew the path intimately, even in the darkness. The wind howled around them, a mournful cry that echoed the turmoil within her. As they descended the cliff path, away from the ruins, Briar glanced back at Eventide. The village lights twinkled below, a familiar and comforting sight that represented everything she was leaving behind. A wave of sadness washed over her, a pang of regret for the life she had known, for the simplicity she had taken for granted. "Will I ever come back?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric didn't stop, didn't slow his pace, but his grip on her hand tightened slightly. "That depends," he said, his voice guarded. "On many things. On the choices we make. On the dangers we face. On the strength of our bond." His words offered little comfort, but they were honest. Briar appreciated that. She had lived a life of practicality, of facing harsh realities. She wasn't looking for empty promises, for fairy tale assurances. She wanted the truth, even if it was painful. They reached the edge of the woods that bordered the cliffs, the trees a dark, looming presence that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of twilight. Alaric paused, his gaze scanning the shadows, his senses alert for any sign of danger. "We will be safer in the forest," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They will be less likely to track us there." He released her hand, but only to reach into a hidden pocket within his coat. He produced a small, silver ring, intricately carved with the same swirling patterns that adorned the ruins. It was beautiful, ancient, and hummed with the same faint energy she had felt from the stones. "This," he said, holding it out to her, "will help protect you. It will mask your scent, dampen your presence, make it harder for them to find you." Briar hesitated, her eyes studying the ring. It was another piece of the puzzle, another element of this strange, hidden world she was being thrust into. She took it from him, her fingers brushing against his, sending another, smaller jolt of energy through her. "What is my scent?" she asked, turning the ring over in her hands. It felt warm, almost alive. Alaric's expression was unreadable in the shadows.
You are more than you appear, Briar.
You carry the scent of your bloodline, the mark of the ancient power that flows within you. It is alluring to some, a threat to others. He reached out and gently took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. A wave of warmth emanated from the ring, spreading through her hand and up her arm, a comforting sensation that eased some of her fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze meeting his. He nodded, a slight inclination of his head. "We must go," he repeated, his voice urgent. He turned and led her into the darkness of the woods, the trees closing in around them, swallowing them whole. Briar followed, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch the silver ring on her finger, a tangible reminder of the bond that had been forged, the journey that had begun. The forest floor was soft beneath her worn boots, a relief, and yet every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, put her senses on high alert. She had never felt so alive, yet so close to danger. Chapter 5. The Town of Silent Hollows. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, the ancient trees towering over them like silent guardians. Alaric moved with a confidence that belied the darkness, his senses honed to the slightest sound, the faintest scent. Briar followed close behind, her hand gripping the silver ring, its warmth a small comfort in the overwhelming unknown. They walked for hours, the only sounds their footfalls on the soft earth and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Briar's legs ached, her body weary from the unaccustomed exertion, but she dared not complain. She knew that Alaric was pushing them hard, driven by a sense of urgency she couldn't fully comprehend. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in dappled light, they reached the edge of a small, secluded town. It was nestled in a hollow, surrounded by rolling hills and shrouded in a perpetual mist that gave it an ethereal, almost otherworldly quality. "Silent Hollows," Alaric said, his voice a low murmur. "It is a place of refuge. For those like us." The town was unlike anything Briar had ever seen. The buildings were old, constructed of dark wood and stone, with steeply pitched roofs and intricately carved details. There was a quiet stillness about the place, a sense of ancient secrets and hidden lives. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something wilder, untamed. As they entered the town, Briar noticed the curious glances of the inhabitants. They were a diverse group, men and women of varying ages, but all possessed a certain intensity, a shared quality that set them apart from the ordinary folk of Eventide. Some had eyes that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, others had an air of quiet power, a sense of something more. Alaric led her through the narrow, winding streets, past shops with strange and unfamiliar wares, past houses with windows that glowed with an inner luminescence. He seemed to know his way around, greeting some of the inhabitants with a nod or a brief exchange of words in a language Briar didn't understand. Finally, they reached a large, imposing building at the edge of the town square. It was constructed of dark stone, with tall, arched windows and a heavy wooden door. A silver wolf's head, intricately carved, adorned the door, its eyes gleaming in the morning light. "This is the sanctuary," Alaric said, his voice softening slightly. "It is where we will be safe.
For now."
He pushed open the heavy door, revealing a large, dimly lit hall. The air inside was warm and inviting, scented with herbs and spices and the faint aroma of something animalistic. Several people were gathered in the hall, talking in hushed tones, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of candles and a large fireplace at the far end of the room. As Alaric and Briar entered, the conversation ceased. All eyes turned towards them, filled with curiosity and suspicion. Briar felt a wave of unease, her hand instinctively reaching for the silver ring on her finger. A tall, imposing woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Alaric. She wore a long, flowing dress of dark green velvet, and a silver pendant, shaped like a wolf's claw, hung around her neck. "Alaric," she said, her voice deep and resonant. "You have returned. And you have brought a guest." Her eyes shifted to Briar, assessing her with a critical gaze. "Who is she?" Alaric stepped forward, his posture regal and commanding. "This is Briar Vex," he said, his voice clear and strong. "She is under my protection. She is bound to me." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features.
Bound?
She questioned, her gaze sharpening. "Explain." Alaric hesitated, glancing at Briar before turning back to the woman. "It is a long story, Elara," he said. "One that requires privacy." Elara studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she nodded slowly. "Very well," she said.
Come.
"We will speak in my chambers." She turned and led them towards a staircase at the back of the hall, Alaric following close behind, his hand resting lightly on Briar's back, a gesture of reassurance and possession. Briar followed, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The eyes of everyone in the hall followed them, and for the first time since leaving Eventide, Briar felt a stirring of panic. She had stepped through a door, and into a world she knew she could not escape. Chapter 6. Whispers of the Past. Elara's chambers were spacious and richly appointed, with tapestries depicting scenes of wolves and forests adorning the walls. A large fireplace crackled merrily, casting a warm glow over the room, and the air was scented with the aroma of cedar and sandalwood. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with ancient tomes bound in leather and clasped with silver. Elara gestured for them to sit on two plush chairs facing the fireplace. She took a seat opposite them, her posture regal and composed, her blue eyes studying them intently. "Now," she said, her voice calm but firm, "tell me everything. How did you find her? And what is this bond you speak of?" Alaric hesitated, glancing at Briar, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving him permission to speak. She knew that she was in a vulnerable position, surrounded by strangers in a strange place. She needed to trust Alaric, to rely on his judgment. He took a deep breath and began to explain, recounting the events of the previous night, Briar's arrival at the ruins, the awakening, the ancient agreement, the bond that had been forged between them. He spoke slowly, carefully, choosing his words with precision, revealing only what he deemed necessary. Elara listened intently, her expression unchanging, her blue eyes fixed on Alaric. She asked few questions, but her gaze was sharp and perceptive, noting every nuance of his story, every flicker of emotion in his eyes. When Alaric finished, Elara turned her attention to Briar. "And you, Briar," she said softly, "what is your understanding of all this?" Briar hesitated, her mind still reeling from the revelations of the past few hours. She had gone from a quiet, solitary life to being thrust into a world of ancient pacts, hidden powers, and werewolves. The word itself felt strange, unreal, yet she knew, deep down, that it was true. I don't understand it all," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I feel it. The connection to Alaric. The pull of the ruins. The truth of his words." Elara nodded slowly, her gaze softening slightly. "The bond between your bloodlines is ancient and powerful," she said. "It was forged centuries ago, to protect both your families from a common enemy. An enemy that still exists." Briar's eyes widened. Who is this enemy?" Elara hesitated, glancing at Alaric. "They are known as the Shadow Hunters," she said finally, her voice low and guarded. "They are a secretive order, dedicated to eradicating our kind. They believe we are abominations, creatures of darkness that must be destroyed." The words sent a shiver of fear down Briar's spine. She had lived a peaceful life, far removed from any such violence or hatred. The thought of being hunted, of being targeted for something she didn't even understand, was terrifying. But why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why now? Because you are the last of your line, Alaric said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and responsibility. The last descendant of the Vex bloodline. And your awakening has triggered the ancient magic, the bond that ties us together. It has made you a target. Briar stared at him, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation. She was the last of her line? A target for a shadowy order of hunters? It was all too much, too overwhelming. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice filled with despair. Alara reached out and placed a comforting hand on her arm. You're safe here, Briar, she said softly. We will protect you. We will teach you.
You are one of us now.
The words, meant to be reassuring, sent a fresh wave of unease through Briar. One of them? What did that even mean? She looked at Alaric, searching his golden eyes for answers, for reassurance. He met her gaze, his expression a mixture of determination and tenderness. He took a slow, deliberate breath. He had brought her here, to his world, and the weight of the action was evident on his face. The whispers of the past now echoed in the present, and they were loud. Chapter 7. The Mark of the Wolf. The weight of Alara's words, the implications of her newfound identity, pressed down on Briar. One of us, she repeated, the phrase tasting foreign and unsettling on her tongue. She looked down at her hands, at the silver ring that now felt like a brand, a permanent marker of a life she hadn't chosen. Alaric, sensing her distress, spoke softly. It is a lot to absorb, Briar. I know, but you're not alone. He reached out and gently covered her hand with his, the warmth of his touch a familiar comfort. We will face this together. Alara nodded in agreement. The first step, she said, her voice firm but kind, is to understand your heritage. To learn about the power that flows within you, the abilities you possess. Abilities? Briar questioned, her brow furrowing. What abilities? Alara smiled, a rare and fleeting expression that softened her features. The Vex bloodline, like the Dragomir line, Alaric's line, has a unique connection to the natural world, she explained. A heightened sense of everything. Strength, speed, agility, the ability to shift. Briar stared at her, uncomprehending. Shift? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric took over, his golden eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter. We are werewolves, Briar, he said, the words spoken softly, yet it resonated with a power that filled the room. We can transform, at will, into wolves. It is our nature, our heritage, our curse. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Briar's mind reeled. Werewolves. She had heard the tales, of course, the whispered warnings of her grandmother. But she had always dismissed them as folklore, as stories meant to frighten children. Now, she was being told that they were real, that she was one of them. She looked at Alaric, at his handsome face, his golden eyes, searching for any sign of deception, of madness. But she saw only sincerity, a deep-seated truth that she could no longer deny. But I've never, she began, her voice trembling. I've never felt anything like that. I've never. It lies dormant, Alaric explained, until awakened, until triggered. Your arrival at the ruins, the activation of the ancient magic, it has begun the process. It has started the change. He stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the misty town below. It is not an easy path, Briar, he said, his voice filled with a weariness that hinted at centuries of experience. It requires control, discipline, training. But it also offers freedom, a connection to the wild, to the primal instincts that lie dormant within us all. He turned back to her, his expression softening. Alara will guide you, he said. She is the elder of our pack. She knows more about the transformation, about our history, than anyone. Alara nodded, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and determination. We will start tomorrow, she said. We will begin with the basics. Meditation, control, understanding your senses. Then, we will move on to the shift. The thought of transforming into a wolf, of losing control, of surrendering to her animalistic instincts, filled Briar with a mixture of fear and a strange, undeniable excitement. It was a terrifying prospect, yet it also held a certain allure, a promise of power, of freedom, of a connection to something ancient and primal. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice filled with doubt. Alaric knelt before her, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "You can, Briar," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "You are stronger than you think. You are a Vex.
And you are mine."
His words, spoken with such conviction, sent a shiver of warmth through her, a spark of hope that ignited within her heart. She looked at him, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, and knew that she had to try. For herself. For him. For the future she was now, irrevocably, a part of. It was the faintest beginning of an acceptance. One that startled her. Chapter 8. Flight through the moonlit woods. The next few days were a blur of intense training and overwhelming revelations. Alara, true to her word, proved to be a demanding but patient teacher. She guided Briar through rigorous exercises designed to heighten her senses, to control her emotions, to tap into the dormant power that flowed within her. Briar learned to focus her hearing, to distinguish the faintest sounds in the forest, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the heartbeat of a small animal. She learned to sharpen her vision, to see in the dim light of the forest, to track the movements of creatures hidden in the shadows. She learned to control her breathing, to calm her mind, to center herself amidst the chaos of her transforming body. The most challenging aspect, however, was the scent. The world exploded with smells she had never noticed before, a symphony of aromas that were both intoxicating and overwhelming. The scent of pine and earth, of animals and humans, of Alaric his scent, in particular, was a constant presence, a warm, musky aroma that both calmed and excited her. Alaric was a constant presence throughout her training, a silent observer, a source of unwavering support. He rarely spoke, but his golden eyes followed her every move, offering encouragement, understanding, and a sense of connection that transcended words. One evening, as the full moon cast a silvery glow over the forest, Alara decided it was time for Briar to attempt her first shift. They stood in a clearing, surrounded by ancient trees, the air thick with anticipation and fear. "The moon is our ally, Briar," Alara said, her voice low and soothing. "It empowers us, strengthens us, guides us. Embrace its energy. Let it flow through you. Let it guide your transformation." Briar closed her eyes, taking deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. She focused on the image of a wolf, on the feeling of freedom, of power, of connection to the wild. She visualized her body changing, shifting, transforming. It began with a tingling sensation in her bones, a feeling of expansion, of stretching. Her muscles began to ripple, her skin to tighten, her senses to sharpen. A wave of heat washed over her, followed by a surge of energy that made her tremble. She gasped, her eyes snapping open, her vision blurring. She looked down at her hands, her fingers elongating, her nails thickening, becoming claws. Her clothes felt constricting, tight against her changing form. Panic surged through her, a wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She struggled to maintain control, to hold on to her human consciousness, but the transformation was too powerful, too overwhelming. Alaric, sensing her distress, stepped forward. "Briar," he said, his voice calm and reassuring.
"Focus. Breathe.
"Trust yourself.
Trust me."
His words, his presence, acted as an anchor, calming the storm within her. She closed her eyes again, focusing on his voice, on his scent, on the bond that connected them. Slowly, gradually, the panic subsided, replaced by a growing sense of acceptance, of surrender. She let go, releasing her human form, embracing the animal within. Her body shifted, twisted, transformed. Bones cracked, muscles rearranged, fur sprouted. She fell to all fours, her perspective changing, her senses exploding. She was a wolf. A young, inexperienced wolf, but a wolf nonetheless. Her fur was a mix of silver and gray, reflecting the moonlight. Her eyes, now a vibrant yellow, scanned the clearing, taking in the world with a newfound clarity. She looked at Alaric, who had also shifted. He was magnificent, a large, powerful wolf with fur the color of midnight and golden eyes that glowed in the darkness. He was the epitome of primal power, of untamed beauty. He nudged her gently with his snout, a silent greeting and invitation. Then, he turned and loped into the forest, beckoning her to follow. Briar hesitated for a moment, her human mind still struggling to comprehend the transformation. But then, her wolf instincts took over, urging her forward. She followed Alaric, her paws silent on the soft earth, her body moving with a grace and agility she had never known. They ran together, through the moonlit woods, a pair of wolves, bound by an ancient pact, by a shared destiny. The wind whipped through her fur, the scent of the forest filled her nostrils, the thrill of the hunt surged through her veins. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly freeing. For the first time since arriving in Silent Hollows, Briar felt a sense of belonging, of purpose. She was a wolf, and she was home. The run was both a bonding and a beginning of a long-awaited destiny. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Snare. The freedom of the run was intoxicating, a release from the fear and uncertainty that had plagued Briar since her arrival in Silent Hollows. As a wolf, she felt connected to Alaric in a way that transcended words, a primal understanding that flowed between them. They communicated through scent and body language, a silent language of the wild. But the idyllic interlude was short-lived. As they neared the edge of the forest, Alaric suddenly stopped, his body stiffening, his senses on high alert. He let out a low growl, a warning that sent a shiver of apprehension down Briar's spine. She followed his gaze, her newly heightened senses picking up a faint, unfamiliar scent, a metallic tang, laced with something acrid, unpleasant. It was a scent that spoke of danger, of malice. Hunters, Alaric communicated, his thoughts a direct transmission to her mind, a skill she was still struggling to master. They are close. We must be careful. Briar's heart pounded in her chest, a primal fear gripping her. She had heard the stories, the whispered warnings of Alara about the shadow hunters, the relentless enemies who sought to destroy their kind. Now, she was facing them, a terrifying reality that shattered the illusion of safety she had begun to find in Silent Hollows. They moved cautiously, staying close to the shadows, their senses straining for any sign of the hunters. The forest, which had felt so liberating just moments before, now seemed menacing, filled with hidden dangers. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic twang cut through the air. Briar felt a searing pain in her leg, a sharp, agonizing sensation that made her stumble. She let out a whimper, her wolf form collapsing to the ground. She looked down and saw it a steel trap, its jaws clamped tightly around her leg, the metal teeth biting deep into her flesh. Blood welled up, staining her silver for a crimson red. Alaric immediately turned back, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of fury and concern. He nudged her gently with his snout, trying to assess the damage, to offer comfort. Stay still, he communicated, his thoughts urgent. I will get you out. He began to work on the trap, his powerful jaws trying to pry it open, but the steel was too strong, the mechanism too complex. He growled in frustration, his efforts proving futile. Briar whined, pain and fear overwhelming her. She could feel the hunters approaching, their scent growing stronger, their presence closing in. She was trapped, vulnerable, a sitting duck. Alaric, sensing her panic, looked at her, his golden eyes conveying a silent message of determination. He would not leave her. He would not let them take her. He stepped back, his body tensing, his muscles coiling. He let out a deafening roar, a challenge, a warning, a desperate attempt to draw the hunter's attention away from her. The roar echoed through the forest, a primal scream that shook the very trees. It was a sound of pure, untamed power, a declaration of war. The hunters responded. Several figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden behind dark masks, their bodies clad in black leather armor. They carried crossbows, swords, and other weapons, all designed to kill werewolves. Alaric stood his ground, his body positioned between Briar and the hunters, a protective shield against the impending attack. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he would not yield. He would fight to the death to protect her. The air crackled with tension, with anticipation, with the inevitability of a brutal confrontation. Briar could only watch and pray for the dawn. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Ancient Bloodline. Alaric's roar seemed to hang in the air, a tangible force that pushed back against the encroaching hunters. They hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sheer power of his wolf form, by the ferocity in his golden eyes. But they were seasoned warriors, trained to kill, and their fear quickly gave way to a cold, calculated determination. "It's Dragomir," one of the hunters hissed, his voice muffled by his mask. "And he's protecting the Vex woman. Take them both." The hunters spread out, forming a semicircle around Alaric and the trapped Briar. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their weapons raised, their eyes focused on their prey. Alaric remained steadfast, a shield of muscle and fur between Briar and the approaching danger. He knew he couldn't defeat them all, not in his wolf form, not with Briar injured and vulnerable.
But he could buy her time.
Time for her to escape, to heal, to survive. He lunged at the nearest hunter, his powerful jaws snapping shut on the man's arm, drawing a scream of pain and surprise. The other hunters reacted swiftly, firing crossbow bolts that whizzed past Alaric's head, embedding themselves in the trees around him. He dodged and weaved, using his agility and speed to avoid the deadly projectiles, but he couldn't evade them all. A bolt grazed his shoulder, drawing blood, but he ignored the pain, his focus solely on protecting Briar. Briar, despite her pain and fear, watched Alaric with a mixture of awe and terror. She had never seen such ferocity, such raw power, such unwavering loyalty. He was fighting for her, risking his life for hers, and the realization stirred something deep within her, a fierce determination to survive, to fight alongside him. She struggled against the trap, her claws scrabbling at the steel, her teeth gnawing at the metal, but it was no use. The trap held her fast, its jaws clamped tightly around her leg. Desperation surged through her, fueling a surge of adrenaline. She closed her eyes, focusing on the pain, on the fear, on the bond she shared with Alaric. She channeled all her energy, all her will, into a single, desperate plea. "Help me," she thought, her mind reaching out to Alaric, to Alara, to anyone who could hear her.
"Help me shift."
She didn't know if it was possible to shift back to her human form while trapped, while injured, but she had to try. She visualized her human body, her hands, her feet, her face. She focused on the feeling of being human, of being Briar Vex. Slowly, painfully, she felt her body begin to change. Her fur receded, her bones shifted, her muscles rearranged. The pain intensified, the steel of the trap biting deeper into her flesh, but she gritted her teeth, pushing through the agony, driven by a desperate need to escape. Finally, with a wrenching gasp, she was human again. Her leg was a mangled mess, bleeding profusely, but she was free of the trap. She crawled away from the scene of the battle, dragging her injured leg behind her, her body screaming in protest. She had to get away, to find help, to survive. As she reached the edge of the clearing, she looked back at Alaric. He was still fighting, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws, but he was tiring, his movements slowing, his injuries mounting. He met her gaze, his golden eyes conveying a silent message. "Go," he urged her.
"Run."
"Survive." Tears streamed down Briar's face, a mixture of pain, fear, and gratitude. She nodded, a silent promise to return, to fight alongside him, to honor the sacrifice he was making for her. Then, she turned and fled into the forest, her injured leg hampering her progress, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she was leaving Alaric behind, to face the hunters alone. She ran on pure will, pure adrenaline. The secrets her bloodline had kept were now splattered, quite literally, in the dirt. Chapter 11. The Unveiling of Truth. Briar ran, stumbled, and crawled through the dense undergrowth, driven by a primal instinct to survive. Her leg throbbed with agonizing pain, each step sending jolts of fire through her body, but she dared not stop. The sounds of the battle, Alaric's roars, the hunter's shouts, faded behind her, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs beneath her hands. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, to find safety, to find help. She followed the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, navigating by instinct, her senses heightened by fear and adrenaline. After what seemed like an eternity, she stumbled upon a small, hidden cave, tucked away behind a curtain of ivy. It was a small, dark space, but it offered a semblance of shelter, a place to rest, to tend to her wounds. She collapsed inside, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. She tore strips of fabric from her already tattered clothing and bound her injured leg, trying to stem the flow of blood. The pain was excruciating, but she focused on her breathing, on calming her mind, on remembering Alara's teachings. As she sat there, in the darkness of the cave, nursing her wounds, her thoughts turned to Alaric. She pictured him, fighting the hunters, his golden eyes filled with fierce determination, his body a shield between her and danger. She wondered if he was still alive, if he had managed to escape, or if she couldn't bear to think about it. She had to believe he was alive. She had to believe he would find her. She had to believe in the bond that connected them, the ancient pact that had brought them together. She closed her eyes, focusing on that bond, on the feeling of warmth and connection that she had felt when their hands had first touched. She reached out with her mind, searching for him, calling to him, silently pleading for him to be safe. And then she heard it, a faint whisper, a distant echo of his voice in her mind. Briar, it was weak, barely audible, but it was him. He was alive. Alaric, she responded, her thoughts a surge of relief and hope. Where are you? Injured, he replied, his voice fading in and out. Hiding there, still searching, Briar's heart sank. He was hurt, vulnerable, and still in danger. She had to find him. She had to help him. But how? She was injured, alone, and miles away from Silent Hollows. She didn't know the forest, didn't know where to go, how to find him. Then, she remembered something Alara had told her, a secret about the Vex bloodline, a hidden ability that had lain dormant within her. The Vex, Alara had said, have a unique connection to the earth, to the very essence of the forest. They can see through the eyes of the trees, hear through the whispers of the wind, feel the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Briar had nothing to lose. She closed her eyes, focusing on the forest around her, on the trees, the wind, the earth. She reached out with her senses, extending her consciousness beyond her body, beyond the confines of the cave. Slowly, gradually, she began to feel it. A connection to the forest, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within her. She saw the trees swaying in the breeze, heard the rustling of leaves, felt the cool earth beneath her hands. And then she saw him. Through the eyes of an ancient oak, she saw Alaric, lying wounded in a small clearing, hidden beneath a thicket of bushes. He was weak, bleeding, but alive. A surge of relief washed over her, followed by a renewed determination. She knew where he was. She could find him. She could help him. She opened her eyes, her mind clear, her purpose renewed. She had a long and arduous journey ahead of her, but she would not falter. She would find Alaric. She would save him. She would unveil the truth of her heritage, one painful step at a time. This was no longer flight but a mission. Chapter 12. A Heart Divided. The journey back to Alaric was a grueling test of endurance. Briar's injured leg screamed in protest with every step, the pain a constant, throbbing reminder of her vulnerability. But she pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to reach him, to offer whatever help she could. She used the trees as her guides, following the vision she had received, navigating the treacherous terrain with a newfound awareness of her surroundings. The forest, which had once seemed so menacing, now felt like an ally, its whispers guiding her, its shadows concealing her. As she neared the clearing where she had seen Alaric, she slowed her pace, her senses on high alert. She could smell the lingering scent of the hunters, the metallic tang of blood, the acrid odor of fear. They were still searching, she knew, and she had to be careful. She crept forward, staying low to the ground, using the cover of the bushes to conceal her movements. Finally, she reached the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. There he was, Alaric, lying beneath a thicket of bushes, his body still and unmoving. He had shifted back to his human form, his clothes torn and bloodied, his face pale and drawn. Briar rushed to his side, her heart clenching with fear. She knelt beside him, gently touching his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his strong jaw, his high cheekbones. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Alaric, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, his golden gaze focusing on her with a mixture of relief and pain. "Briar," he murmured, his voice weak and raspy. "You came back, of course." "I came back," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I promised I would." She examined his wounds, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency she didn't know she possessed. He had several deep gashes on his chest and arms, and a nasty wound on his leg, similar to her own. She tore more strips of fabric from her clothing and began to clean and bandage his wounds, using the knowledge she had gained from Alara's rudimentary first aid lessons. He winced in pain, but he didn't complain, his eyes fixed on her face, his expression a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something deeper, more profound. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the strength of his body, the lean muscles beneath his skin, the scars that spoke of past battles, past struggles. She felt a strange mixture of emotions: fear for his safety, gratitude for his protection, and a growing attraction to him, to his strength, his courage, his vulnerability. Her heart was divided. She was a woman of a certain age, a widow who had long ago buried her dreams of romance. Yet, here she was, drawn to a man who was both her protector and her captor, in a way. A man from a different world, a different time, a different species. It was a forbidden love, a dangerous attraction, a bond forged in shadow and sealed with blood. It was a love that defied logic, defied reason, defied everything. "We need to get you to safety," she said, her voice firm despite the turmoil within her. "To Alara. She can help you heal." Alaric nodded weakly. "But the hunters, I'll deal with the hunters," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You need to rest. Conserve your strength." She helped him to sit up, supporting his weight as he leaned against her. He was heavy, his body solid and strong, and she felt a surge of protectiveness towards him, a fierce determination to keep him safe. She looked into his golden eyes, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and love. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, that she was walking a tightrope between two worlds, between two destinies. But she couldn't turn back. She was bound to Alaric, by fate, by choice, by love. And that made continuing her only course. Chapter 13. The Price of Freedom. Getting Alaric back to Silent Hollows was a monumental task. He was weak and disoriented, barely able to walk, and Briar, with her own injured leg, was in no condition to carry him. They moved slowly, painstakingly, through the dense forest, relying on each other for support, their bodies pressed close together, their shared warmth a small comfort in the cold night air. Briar used her newfound connection to the forest to guide them, avoiding the areas where she sensed the hunters were still searching. She listened to the whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, the calls of nocturnal creatures, using them as her eyes and ears, navigating the treacherous terrain with a growing confidence. As they walked, they talked, sharing their fears, their hopes, their feelings. Alaric told her more about his past, about his life as a prince of the Dragomir clan, about the ancient rivalry with the Shadow Hunters, about the burden of responsibility he carried. Briar, in turn, told him about her life in Eventide, about her late husband, Thomas, about the quiet, solitary existence she had led before he had awakened her, before he had changed her life forever. They spoke of their growing attraction to each other, acknowledging the forbidden nature of their feelings, the dangers they faced, the obstacles that stood in their way. But they couldn't deny the bond that connected them, the pull that drew them together, the love that was blossoming between them, despite everything. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Briar confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "After Thomas, the first thought that part of me was dead." Alaric reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the lines of her face, his golden eyes filled with tenderness. "You are alive, Briar," he said softly. "More alive than you have ever been. And you make me feel alive, too." His words, spoken with such sincerity, sent a wave of warmth through her, melting the icy fear that had gripped her heart. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, savoring the moment of intimacy, of connection, amidst the chaos and danger that surrounded them. But the reality of their situation soon intruded. They were still far from Silent Hollows, and the hunters were still out there, searching for them. They had to keep moving, to reach safety, to find a way to survive. As they neared the outskirts of the town, they encountered a patrol of werewolves from Silent Hollows, alerted by Alara to their disappearance. Relief washed over Briar as she saw the familiar faces, the protective presence of her newfound pack. The werewolves helped them to return to the sanctuary, where Alara immediately tended to Alaric's wounds, using her knowledge of ancient healing techniques to accelerate his recovery. Briar, too, received treatment, her injured leg finally receiving the proper care it needed. As Alaric lay recovering in Alara's chambers, Briar sat beside him, holding his hand, watching over him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She knew that they had survived this encounter, but the threat of the shadow hunters still loomed large. They would not stop hunting them, not until they were both dead or captured. "What do we do now?" she asked Alara, her voice filled with uncertainty. Alara looked at her, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination.
"We fight," she said simply.
"We protect our own. We defend our home. We survive." But Briar knew that survival came at a price. The price of freedom, the price of love, the price of everything. She looked at Alaric, his face pale and drawn, his body weakened by his injuries. She knew that she would do anything to protect him, to keep him safe, even if it meant sacrificing her own life, her own happiness. The price, whatever it may be, was one that she could pay. Chapter 14. Beneath a Sky of Embers. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation, a quiet dread that hung over Silent Hollows like a shroud. Alaric recovered slowly, his body healing with an unnatural speed, thanks to Alara's ministrations and his own inherent resilience. But the emotional wounds, the psychological scars of the battle lingered. Briar stayed by his side, tending to his needs, offering him comfort and support, their bond deepening with each passing day. They shared quiet moments together, stolen glances, whispered conversations, their love a fragile flame flickering in the darkness that surrounded them. But the threat of the shadow hunters was ever present. Alara increased patrols, tightened security, preparing the pack for another attack. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the hunters returned, seeking revenge, seeking to finish what they had started. Briar, too, prepared herself. She continued her training with Alara, honing her skills, mastering her abilities, transforming into her wolf form with increasing ease and control. She was no longer the frightened, uncertain woman who had arrived in Silent Hollows. She was a warrior, a protector, a werewolf. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, a sense of unease settled over the town. The air grew thick with tension, the wind whispered warnings, the animals fell silent. Alaric, sensing the impending danger, rose from his bed, his body still weak, but his spirit unbroken. "They are coming," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We must be ready." He donned his leather armor, strapped on his sword, and prepared to face the enemy, his golden eyes burning with a fierce determination. Briar, too, armed herself, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. They gathered in the town square, alongside Alara and the other werewolves, a united front against the approaching darkness. The sky above them turned a menacing shade of red, like a sky of embers, reflecting the flames of the impending battle. And then they arrived. The shadow hunters. Emerging from the forest, their faces hidden behind their masks, their bodies clad in black, their weapons glinting in the fading light. They were numerous, more than before, and they were led by a tall, imposing figure, his presence radiating a cold, calculating malice. "This is the end," Dragomir, the leader of the hunters, said, his voice amplified by a magical device, echoing through the square. "The end of your line. The end of your abomination." Alaric stepped forward, his posture regal and commanding, his voice clear and strong. "We will not yield," he declared. "We will not be intimidated. We will fight." And with that, the battle began. A clash of steel and claws, of magic and might, of darkness and light. The werewolves fought with a primal ferocity, defending their home, their loved ones, their very existence. Briar fought alongside Alaric, her wolf form a blur of silver fur, her claws tearing at the hunters, her teeth sinking into their flesh. She fought with a courage she didn't know she possessed, fueled by her love for Alaric, by her loyalty to her pack, by her determination to survive. The battle raged through the night, a chaotic dance of death and destruction. Buildings were damaged, fires erupted, and the air was filled with the sounds of screams, roars, and the clash of weapons. Briar fought bravely, protecting Alaric, protecting her pack, but she was outnumbered, outmatched. She sustained several injuries, her body tiring, her strength waning. She saw Alaric, fighting fiercely, his golden eyes blazing with fury, but he, too, was struggling. He was surrounded by hunters, their weapons closing in, their intent clear. Fear surged through Briar, a cold wave of terror that threatened to overwhelm her. She knew that she had to do something, anything, to save him. She had to unleash the full extent of her power. She had to call upon the curse and blessing that came with being a Vex. Chapter 15. The Ritual of Binding. Seeing Alaric surrounded, his strength failing, ignited something primal within Briar. It wasn't just fear. It was a fierce, protective rage, a surge of power she hadn't known she possessed. It was the Vex blood, the ancient magic, finally unleashed. She threw back her head and let out a howl, a sound that was both a lament and a war cry. It was a sound that echoed through the town square, silencing the din of battle, drawing the attention of both werewolves and hunters alike. Her body began to change, to transform, but not into the wolf form she had grown accustomed to. This was something different, something more. Her bones shifted, her muscles expanded, her skin shimmered with an ethereal light. Her eyes glowed with an intense, silver fire, and her hair swirled around her like a living storm. She grew taller, stronger, her presence radiating an aura of raw power, of ancient magic. The hunters recoiled, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and awe. They had never seen anything like this before. This was not the transformation of a mere werewolf. This was something other, something ancient. What is she? One of the hunters stammered, his voice trembling. The leader of the hunters, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable, spoke in a low, chilling voice. "She is a Vex," he said. "A true Vex. Unleashing the binding." Briar, now fully transformed, stood at the center of the square, a figure of immense power and ethereal beauty. She raised her hands, and the very air around her seemed to crackle with energy. She spoke, her voice amplified by the magic that coursed through her, her words echoing through the town square, reaching the ears of every living creature. "This ends now," she declared. "This cycle of violence, of hatred, of destruction. I will bind you. I will end you." She began to chant, her words ancient and powerful, a language that predated humanity, a language of magic, of creation, of destruction. The air around her shimmered, the ground trembled, and the sky above them swirled with a vortex of energy. The hunters, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as Briar unleashed the full extent of her power. The binding, Alara had explained, was an ancient Vex ritual, a last resort, a desperate measure to end a conflict, to protect their kind. It was a ritual that drew upon the very essence of the earth, the power of the forest, the magic of the moon. It was a ritual that could bind the hunters, strip them of their powers, render them harmless. But it was also a ritual that came at a cost to Briar, a cost to her soul. As she chanted, she felt the energy draining from her body weakening, her spirit fading. She knew that she was sacrificing a part of herself, a part of her humanity, to save Alaric, to save her pack, to save everything. But she didn't hesitate. She continued to chant, her voice growing weaker, her body trembling, her spirit fading. She focused on Alaric, on his golden eyes, on his love, on his sacrifice. She poured all her remaining energy, all her remaining will, into the ritual. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the ritual was complete. The hunters, their bodies frozen, their powers stripped, their weapons falling to the ground, were bound. Briar collapsed, her body spent, her spirit drained, her consciousness fading. She had done it. She had saved them. But at what cost? Darkness claimed her, a finality that she might not come back from. Chapter 16. Echoes of Betrayal. Darkness. Silence. A void where Briar's consciousness drifted, untethered, lost. She felt nothing. No pain, no fear, no joy, no sorrow. Just emptiness. Then, slowly, gradually, she began to sense something. A faint warmth, a gentle touch, a familiar scent. Alaric. She opened her eyes, her vision blurry, her body aching. She was lying in a bed, in Alara's chambers, the familiar scent of herbs and spices filling the air. Alaric was sitting beside her, holding her hand, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief, concern, and love. Briar, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You saved us. You saved me. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, barely audible. The hunters bound. Alaric confirmed. They are powerless. Alara and the others are dealing with them. Briar closed her eyes, relief washing over her. She had done it. She had succeeded. But at a cost. She could feel it, deep within her, a hollowness, an emptiness where a part of her soul had been. The binding, she whispered. What have I done? Alaric hesitated, his expression clouded with sadness. You unleash the full power of the Vex bloodline, he explained. A power that few have ever wielded. It changes you, Briar. It marks you. She looked at her hands, at her skin, which still shimmered with a faint, ethereal light. She felt different. Changed. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Will I ever be the same? She asked, her voice trembling. Alaric squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring, his eyes filled with love. You are still you, Briar, he said softly. But you are also more. You are a protector, a guardian, a force of nature. His words offered some comfort, but they couldn't fully erase the fear, the uncertainty, the loss that she felt. She had sacrificed a part of herself, a part of her humanity, to save them. And she didn't know if she could ever get it back. As she lay there, recovering, her thoughts turned to the hunters, to their leader, to his words. He had known about the binding, about the Vex power. How? She asked Alaric, her voice still weak, but her mind sharp. How did they know? She whispered. About the binding? Alaric hesitated, his expression darkening. He looked away, his jaw tightening, his golden eyes filled with a flicker of shame. There is something you should know, Briar, he said, his voice low and heavy. Something I should have told you sooner. He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and pain. The shadow hunters, they were not always our enemies, he confessed. Centuries ago, they were our allies. We fought together, side by side, against a common foe, a darker force. Briar stared at him, uncomprehending. Allies? The hunters? The people who had tried to kill them? It didn't make sense. But how? She whispered. Why did they turn against you? Alaric's voice was filled with a deep, ancient sadness. Because of a betrayal, he said. A betrayal that shattered the alliance, that created the feud that has lasted for centuries. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if lost in the memories of the past. It was a Vex, he said finally, his voice barely audible. A Vex who betrayed us. A Vex who sided with the darkness. A Vex who caused the rift. The words hit Briar like a physical blow. A Vex? One of her ancestors? A traitor? It was a revelation that shook her to her core, that challenged everything she thought she knew about her heritage, about herself. And the echo of the past betrayal had just reshaped her future. Chapter 17. The Gathering Storm. The revelation of the Vex betrayal hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud that overshadowed Briar's recovery. The knowledge that one of her ancestors had been responsible for the centuries-long feud between the werewolves and the shadow hunters filled her with a mixture of shame, anger, and a profound sense of responsibility. She questioned Alaric relentlessly, demanding to know every detail of the ancient betrayal, every nuance of the story. He told her of a powerful Vex sorceress, Lyra, who had fallen in love with a dark sorcerer, a leader of a rival clan that sought to control the power of the werewolves for their own nefarious purposes. Lyra, blinded by love and seduced by the promise of power, had betrayed her own people, revealing their secrets, their weaknesses, to the enemy. Her actions had led to a devastating war, a bloody conflict that had shattered the alliance between the werewolves and the hunters, creating a rift that had never healed.
But why?
Briar asked, her voice filled with anguish. Why would she do that? Why would she betray her own kind? Alaric sighed, his expression filled with a weariness that transcended centuries. Love, power, ambition, they can corrupt even the purest of hearts, he said. Lyra, she was seduced by the darkness. She believed she could control it, that she could use it for good. But she was wrong. Briar felt a deep sense of sorrow, not just for the werewolves who had suffered because of Lyra's actions, but for Lyra herself. She understood, in a way, the temptation, the allure of forbidden power, the seductive nature of love. She, too, had been drawn to Alaric, to his strength, his power, his darkness. But she had chosen a different path. She had chosen to fight for the light, to protect her pack, to honor the bond that connected them. She had chosen love, but not at the expense of her integrity, of her soul. As she recovered, she spent hours in the sanctuary library, poring over ancient texts, researching the Vex bloodline, searching for answers, for understanding. She learned more about Lyra, about her powers, about her betrayal, but she also learned about the other Vex, the ones who had fought against the darkness, the ones who had remained loyal to the werewolves, the ones who had tried to heal the rift. She discovered that the binding, the ritual she had performed, was not just a weapon of destruction, but also a tool of redemption. It could be used to heal, to restore balance, to unite. And that gave her hope. Hope that she could use her power, her heritage, to undo the damage that Lyra had caused, to bridge the gap between the werewolves and the hunters, to create a new future. But she knew that it would not be easy. The shadow hunters were still out there, their hatred fueled by centuries of mistrust and violence. They would not easily forgive, not easily forget. And there was something else, something that Alaric had not told her, something that she had discovered in her research. The dark sorcerer, the one who had seduced Lyra, had not been defeated. He had escaped. And he was still out there, somewhere, plotting his revenge, waiting for an opportunity to strike. A gathering storm was brewing, a confluence of ancient hatreds, forbidden powers, and a love that defied all odds. Briar knew that she was at the center of it all, a pawn in a game that had been playing out for centuries. She had to find that leader. But she was also more than a pawn. She was a Vex, a protector, a force of nature. And she would not yield. She would fight for her love, for her pack, for her future. A future where she could use her power to combat this growing evil. Chapter 18. Into the Heart of Darkness. The knowledge of the surviving dark sorcerer, Mocker, cast a long shadow over Silent Hollows. He was a phantom menace, an unseen enemy lurking in the darkness, his power a constant threat to their fragile peace. Briar knew that she had to find him, to stop him before he could unleash his vengeance upon them. She consulted with Alara, sharing her research, her fears, her determination. Alara, initially reluctant, eventually agreed to help. She knew that Mocker was a danger that could not be ignored, a threat that had to be confronted. They began to gather information, piecing together fragments of ancient lore, searching for clues to Mocker's whereabouts, his plans, his weaknesses. They discovered that he had been amassing power, gathering followers, preparing for a final, devastating attack. He was hiding, they learned, in a fortress deep within the Shadowlands, a desolate, forbidden territory shrouded in darkness and steeped in ancient magic. It was a place of fear, of despair, of evil. Briar knew that she had to go there. She had to confront Mocker, to end his reign of terror, to save them all. It was a dangerous mission, a suicide mission perhaps, but she was prepared to risk everything. Alaric, fiercely protective, vehemently opposed the idea. He argued that it was too dangerous, that she was not ready, that she would be walking into a trap. But Briar was resolute. She had made her decision. She would not be swayed. "I have to do this, Alaric," she said, her voice firm, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "I am a Vex. It is my destiny, my responsibility." He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of fear, admiration, and love. He knew that he couldn't stop her, that her spirit was unbreakable, her will unyielding. He sighed, his shoulders slumping, his resistance crumbling. "Then I will go with you," he said, his voice low and heavy. "I will not let you face this alone." Briar smiled, a bittersweet expression that conveyed both gratitude and sorrow. She knew that he was risking his life for her, that he was walking into the heart of darkness alongside her. They prepared for their journey, gathering supplies, honing their skills, strengthening their bond. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, a sorcerer of immense power, a master of dark magic. But they were not afraid. They were united by love, by loyalty, by destiny. They set off at dawn, leaving Silent Hollows behind, venturing into the unknown, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and hope. They traveled for days, through dense forests, across treacherous mountains, their senses on high alert, their bodies weary, their spirits unwavering. As they neared the Shadowlands, the landscape began to change. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, the air became thick and heavy, the sky darkened, as if the very land itself was corrupted by evil. They felt the presence of Mocker, his dark magic permeating the air, his malevolent gaze watching them, his sinister influence testing their resolve. They pressed on, their determination fueled by their love for each other, by their commitment to their pack, by their hope for a better future. Finally, they reached the fortress, a towering structure of black stone, silhouetted against the stormy sky, its presence radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated evil. It was the heart of darkness, the lair of the enemy, the final battleground. They stood before it, hand in hand, their hearts pounding in their chests, their senses on high alert, their spirits ready for the ultimate confrontation. They were two souls, bound by fate, by love, by destiny, facing the darkness together, their courage unwavering, their determination absolute. The battle was not just for themselves, but for the hope of their joined futures. Chapter 19. The Redemption of Souls. The fortress was a monument to despair, its black stone walls radiating an oppressive aura that chilled Briar to the bone. The air was thick with the stench of decay and dark magic, a palpable manifestation of Mocker's twisted power. As they approached the entrance, two hulking figures emerged from the shadows, their bodies twisted and deformed by Mocker's magic, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They were guardians, sentinels of the darkness, their sole purpose to protect their master. Alaric drew his sword, the silver blade gleaming in the dim light, his golden eyes fixed on the approaching creatures. Briar, too, prepared herself, her body shifting, transforming into her wolf form, her claws extended, her senses on high alert. The battle was swift and brutal. The Guardians were formidable opponents, their strength enhanced by dark magic, their bodies resistant to conventional weapons. But Alaric and Briar fought with a fierce determination, their movements coordinated, their bond strengthening their resolves. Alaric, with his swordsmanship and experience, engaged one of the Guardians, his blade deflecting their attacks, his golden eyes searching for an opening. Briar, in her wolf form, attacked the other, her claws tearing at their flesh, her teeth sinking into their limbs, her agility allowing her to evade their clumsy blows. Finally, after a grueling struggle, they managed to defeat the Guardians, their bodies collapsing into dust, their dark magic dissipating into the air. But the victory was short-lived. They knew that this was just the beginning, a prelude to the true battle that lay ahead. They entered the fortress, their senses straining for any sign of Mocker, their hearts pounding in their chests. The interior was a labyrinth of dark corridors and chambers, each more sinister than the last. The walls were lined with grotesque carvings, depicting scenes of torture and death, and the air was filled with whispers, echoes of tormented souls trapped within the fortress. As they ventured deeper, they encountered more of Mocker's minions, twisted creatures and corrupted humans, all serving their master's dark will. They fought their way through them, their determination unwavering, their love for each other their guiding light. Finally, they reached the heart of the fortress, a vast chamber where Mocker awaited them. He was sitting on a throne of black obsidian, his body cloaked in shadows, his face hidden behind a mask of bone, his eyes glowing with an unholy red light. "Welcome, Briar Vex," Mocker said, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. "And you, Alaric Dragomir. I have been expecting you." Alaric stepped forward, his sword raised, his expression defiant. "We have come to end your reign of terror, Mocker," he declared.
To stop you.
Mocker chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down Briar's spine.
"You cannot stop me," he said.
"I am eternal. I am power." Briar stepped forward, standing beside Alaric, her wolf form radiating an aura of ancient magic. "We will see about that," she said, her voice firm, her eyes glowing with silver fire. The final battle began. A clash of light and darkness, of ancient magic and corrupted power, of love and hate. Mocker unleashed his full might, summoning dark creatures, casting spells of destruction, his power overwhelming. Alaric fought with his sword, his movements swift and precise, his determination unwavering, but he was no match for Mocker's magic. He sustained several injuries, his body weakening, his strength failing. Briar, in her wolf form enhanced with her Vex power, fought with a ferocity she had never known, her claws and teeth tearing at Mocker's defenses, her ancient magic clashing with his corrupted power. But he was too strong, too experienced, his dark magic too potent. She saw Alaric fall, his body struck by a bolt of dark energy, his life force fading. Fear surged through her, a cold wave of terror that threatened to consume her. But then, she remembered the binding, the ritual she had performed before. She knew that it was their only hope. She focused all her energy, all her will, all her love, into one final, desperate act. She began to chant, her voice echoing through the chamber, her words ancient and powerful, drawing upon the very essence of the earth, the power of the forest, the magic of the moon. But this time it was different. This time, she was not binding Mocker to destroy him. She was binding him to redeem him. She was using the Vex power, not to destroy, but to heal. It was a risky gamble, a desperate attempt to change the course of destiny, to break the cycle of violence, to create a new future. As she chanted, she felt Mocker's resistance, his dark magic fighting against hers, his will struggling to break free. But she held on, her love for Alaric, her hope for a better future, fueling her determination. She poured all her remaining strength into it, all that she could conjure from her soul. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. The chamber pulsed with conflicting energies, Briar's silvery white Vex magic clashing against Mocker's corrupted, shadowy power. The air crackled, the ground trembled, and the very walls of the fortress seemed to groan under the strain of the titanic struggle. Mocker, his eyes blazing with fury and disbelief, fought against the binding with all his might. He hurled bolts of dark energy, summoned monstrous creatures, and unleashed waves of fear and despair, attempting to break Briar's concentration, to shatter her resolve. But Briar held firm, her voice unwavering, her focus absolute. She poured her love for Alaric, her hope for the future, her very soul into the ritual, channeling the ancient Vex power, not to destroy, but to heal, to redeem. She saw, through the cracks in Mocker's defenses, glimpses of his past, of the man he once was, before the darkness had consumed him. She saw his pain, his loneliness, his regret. She saw the flicker of humanity that still remained, buried deep beneath layers of hatred and corruption. And she reached out to that flicker, to that spark of humanity, offering him a chance for redemption, a path to forgiveness, a way out of the darkness. Slowly, gradually, Mocker's resistance began to crumble. His dark magic weakened, his monstrous creations dissipated, and his eyes, once filled with hatred, now flickered with confusion, with doubt. He looked at Briar, at her radiant form, at her unwavering gaze, at the power of her love, and he saw a reflection of Lyra, the Vex sorceress who had betrayed him, who had broken his heart, who had driven him to darkness. But he also saw something different. He saw forgiveness. He saw hope. He saw a chance for redemption. And he surrendered. His dark magic dissipated, his body slumped, and his mask of bone fell to the floor, revealing his true face, a face etched with centuries of pain, of regret, of loneliness. The binding was complete, but it was not a binding of chains, of imprisonment. It was a binding of healing, of redemption. Mocker, stripped of his dark power, his soul cleansed, his heart healed, looked at Briar with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse, filled with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "You have freed me." Briar, exhausted but triumphant, her body still shimmering with the fading remnants of the Vex power, nodded slowly. "It is over," she said, her voice soft, filled with compassion. Alaric, who had been slowly regaining consciousness, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and awe. He had never seen anything like it. The power of the Vex bloodline, used not for destruction, but for healing, for redemption. He rose to his feet, his body weak, but his spirit renewed. He walked over to Briar and took her hand, his golden eyes filled with love, with gratitude, with respect. "You did it," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You saved us all." Briar smiled, a bittersweet expression that conveyed both relief and sorrow. She had won. She had defeated Mocker. She had saved her love, her pack, her future. But she had also changed. The binding, the use of the Vex power, had left its mark on her, transforming her, making her more. She was no longer just Briar Vex, the widow from Eventide. She was a guardian, a protector, a force of nature. And she knew that her journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, wounds to heal. But she was not alone. She had Alaric, her love, her partner, her soulmate. And she had her pack, her family, her home. They left the fortress, leaving Mocker behind, to find his own path to redemption, to atone for his past sins, to heal. As they emerged from the heart of darkness, the sky above them cleared. The sun broke through the clouds, and a new dawn began. A dawn of hope, of healing, of love. It was the final confrontation of hearts, not in war, but in healing and the promise of beginning anew. Epilogue. The return to Silent Hollows was a quiet one, filled with a sense of profound peace and weary relief. The pack, having heard the tale of Mocker's redemption, greeted them not with boisterous celebration, but with a respectful understanding of the profound transformation that had occurred, both within Briar and within the very fabric of their world. The Shadow Hunters, bound by Briar's ritual, were no longer a threat. Alara, with Alaric and Briar's guidance, began the slow, delicate process of reconciliation, offering them a chance to atone for their past actions, to join the werewolves in a new era of peace and cooperation. Some refused, clinging to their hatred, but others, touched by Briar's act of mercy and inspired by Mocker's transformation, accepted the offer, laying down their weapons, shedding their masks, and embracing a new path. Briar and Alaric, their bond strengthened by their shared trials, their love deepened by their sacrifices, found solace in each other's arms. They spent their days exploring the forest, sharing quiet moments, building a new life together. Their relationship a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries, to heal wounds, to create miracles. Briar, though forever changed by the binding, embraced her new identity, her enhanced powers, her role as a guardian, a protector, a beacon of hope. She continued to learn, to grow, to master her abilities, using her Vex heritage not for destruction, but for healing, for balance, for unity. She established a council, composed of werewolves, former shadow hunters, and even Mocker, who, having found a measure of peace, dedicated himself to helping others find redemption. They worked together to build a better future, a future where ancient rivalries were replaced by cooperation, where hatred gave way to understanding, where darkness was banished by light. Years passed, and Silent Hollows flourished, becoming a haven for those seeking refuge, a symbol of hope for a world yearning for peace. Briar and Alaric, their love enduring, their bond unbreakable, watched over their community, their hearts filled with gratitude, with joy, with love. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, Briar and Alaric stood on the cliffs overlooking Eventide, the village where Briar's journey had begun. The ruins, once a symbol of fear and mystery, now stood as a testament to the power of love, of forgiveness, of redemption. Briar looked at Alaric, her eyes filled with a love that had transcended time, space, and even species. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, their bond as strong as ever. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet contentment. "We created a new world." Alaric smiled, his golden eyes reflecting the setting sun, his heart overflowing with love for the woman who had changed his life, who had shown him the true meaning of courage, of compassion, of hope. "We did," he agreed, his voice soft, filled with a profound peace. Together, they stood there, hand in hand, silhouetted against the vibrant sky, two souls bound by fate, by love, by destiny. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not through violence, but through love. And their love story, a tale of a woman who had found her power, a man who had found his redemption, and a world that had found its hope, would be whispered through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human and the werewolf spirit. The twilight deepened, embracing them and everything they had created.